So this week we want to talk about sales activity tracking. Now, this is the concept of figuring out what your salespeople are doing, not based on what they're reporting on their own, but using their calendar as a way to see what kind of activities are happening with the sales organization. Now, one of the things that comes up a lot with sales teams, people who've worked in these orgs can attest to it, is that logging and tracking can be a bit of black magic. And a lot of times it's because people are busy. In other cases, it's because they're disorganized. But we just want to take excuses off the table and allow our salespeople to do what they do, but still pull good data about what they're doing so we can figure out what kind of activities are leading to movement in our pipeline and ultimately to close deals. So the concept here is utilizing the calendar, whatever calendar system you use. We use Google Calendar at my company, but whatever you use, utilizing that system, creating a taxonomy of event types, and then based on a certain criteria, logging that activity and tracking exactly what's happening. So if you have a sales process that includes, as we do, discovery, demo, second demo, then those are the kind of things that you can create your taxonomy around, and then you can log activity accordingly. And this is going to allow you to get the bigger numbers to figure out where you're losing different kind of prospects in the funnel, or what kind of things you want your team to be doing more of, especially as you're doing performance management. So as we always do with building process, going to kick it off with some questions. And what we want to figure out is what should we be asking about the sales activity? What's important to know? So we'll take those over to ChatGPT and just get, I think I've taken some feedback here to get, just 3 to 5 questions instead of a full 20 that we need to have. All right, so we described the full process to ChatGPT here. Basic idea to use the Google Workspace calendar and assess what they're doing based on the name of the event, and then determine who the prospect is based on the domain of the external party on the event. So if they're at a calendar event that has only people from our company, then we know not to match that to any kind of prospect or sales activity. But if there is an external party with a member of our sales team, then we know it's some kind of event. And assuming we have a consistent taxonomy for them to name these events, we can log that activity according to what it is. So let's see what they give us here. All right, so I'm going to read these questions out for those listening on audio and talk through how I plan to deal with some of these issues. So how standardized are event titles and descriptions across the team? So if titles are inconsistent, call with Acme versus Acme Info versus prospect call classification will be unreliable. So what we tend to do with this, and this is a great question to ask, we will force our sales team to use some kind of scheduling tool. Calendly is the one we use, but there's a million of these, and that will allow us to give them a standard template of names. But then the other thing we'll do is we'll do an audit every now and then of their calendars, because sometimes salespeople schedule in a different way, and just make sure that they're using the right naming. The last thing you can do is, if you want to have a couple different words to describe the same thing, intro, discovery, for instance, that's fine, but I tend to go with a stricter format because I want them to actually follow through on the process and not create a million variations of it. Just keep it simple, don't over complicate it, but sometimes there are synonyms for a word that you want to catch in the name. So that's a great question to ask. So that's question 1. Question 2, how will I distinguish internal versus external meetings? All right, so question 2, how will I distinguish internal versus external meetings? And what they're saying here is relying solely on email domains works, but you should define exceptions like Gmail, Outlook, free accounts. Consider building an allow deny list for domains that should not count as prospect meetings. Now, the one issue with this is we do occasionally have prospects that have Gmail accounts. Sometimes people prospecting for a company will prefer to use a personal email just so they don't get their brand too much focus from the sales team if they're just doing a little bit of discovery. So we find that happens fairly often. What I will do is use the CRM to match to the email. So instead of worrying about the allow deny list, instead I'm going to say, does this email match a prospect we actually have in the CRM? And if not, you can have some kind of follow-up to ask the salesperson to say, was this a prospect meeting? Maybe some kind of survey process in the automation. So there's a way to get around it, but I wouldn't say that we should blacklist Gmail and free domains necessarily. Okay, question 3. What activities should be tracked and how will they be categorized? Yeah, so this is just going to be the 3 that we're going to do today, but you could have more than that. What I'm going to do is we're going to have discovery call, then we're going to have demo and demo follow-up. we'll call that proposal in this case, but I want you to think about it in terms of your own sales process. So don't think that ours is all the same, but it's going to be discovery, call, demo, proposal. And that should be all we cover for today's session. Number 4, how will data quality and validation be handled? Yeah, I think what we should do is some periodic audits here, especially if you're dealing with a small sales team. This isn't that hard. We will refine the automation itself. You don't have to automate this. You can do this with a VA or somebody else, but the way I would do it is via an automation. Have some kind of job that's pulling in the Google calendars each week and grabbing these events. It's just obviously easier than having a person do it, but even if you are having a person do it, there's going to have to be some kind of audit function that somebody higher up takes a look at what's happening with the events, what's actually getting logged. And last question, how will insights connect back to the CRM and sales outcome? That's a great question. We're not going to answer that here. What we're looking to do is track this so that we have the data as a foundation. A lot of times, and maybe this is one of the themes that I'll start to bring out with this show, is people want to think about the end state way before they need to. And a lot of times they get to the end state, but they have really, really, really poor data initially. So a big feature of building process is to isolate the specific thing we're trying to do so that we can actually deliver that thing. And the specific thing we're trying to do is deliver this data. And then downstream, we expect somebody else, maybe us in another episode or a business analyst, to use it. But the data has to be good for them to use it. I'm often on the other end of this where we've got the business analyst, we've got the leadership ready to review results, but they have terrible data. They have data that's so poor that they are just left to mostly speculate, take guesses, fill in the gaps. So let's start from the bottom and get the data right, and then we don't have to worry about that kind of situation. So I'm going to take these questions, I'm going to throw them into our document, and then we'll start working on the flowchart right after that. Okay, so we put our questions into the document here, and in the meantime, we put together our flow. So this is the actual decision tree that's going to go on in your automation, or if you're working with some kind of executive assistant or virtual assistant, you name it, somebody who has to run this process for you. So in the process of your automation, you're going to receive an event. Now, with a lot of salespeople's calendars, you're going to receive a lot of events, but this cycle should happen for each event. This is a decision tree. So this is the programmatic flow that we would use in the automation or the human who's doing this. So we ask ourselves in terms of our own taxonomy, is this discovery, demo, or proposal? Now remember, this should match your own taxonomy. As a matter of fact, I'm going to put a note in here just to make sure that that's available to you to say match this to whatever your actual event taxonomy is for your sales process. All right, so I've added a note right there. So the decision should match your company's event taxonomy. Now we talked about, for the sample here, having a discovery, demo, and proposal. So we ask if the event is each of these kind of things. If it is, we want to look for the prospect in the CRM. Now that's based on the other attendees on the event, and we talked about that. There may be some email mismatching. We may not be able to exactly match the domain. And if that's the case, then we want to have an automated process where we email the salesperson to identify the prospect. Remember, focus here is to make this easy for them. So we don't want them to have to go in and modify a whole bunch of things in the CRM. We just say, share us a link to the prospect in the CRM. Now, it's important that the prospect actually be in the CRM. If the salesperson doesn't even have that, then this should be a motivation for them to put it in there. But the email itself should just be reply with a link to that in the CRM, and then we can have the automation match it. And then we will log the activity in the end. Now, where we're logging the activity, it may be your CRM. That's what we do. In some other cases, you may have a separate database you're doing it. Could be as simple as a Google Sheet. The important part is that you're capturing this data in a consistent format wherever it goes, and you can always transfer it to another place in the future. So this is the workflow. We're going to take this flow and we're going to throw it in the sheet. And then from this, we're going to go back out and generate the full procedure we want to do. Now remember, the procedure is upstream of whatever we want to do with it, whether it's an automation or a virtual assistant or something else that you do yourself. Even the salespeople themselves do themselves. I wouldn't recommend that, but that is an option. The point is, this is the way we're categorizing events regardless of how we actually do that, whether we program it or have a person do it in the manual and old-fashioned way. Okay, so we put the flow right here in our document. We're keeping our questions, our flow, and now our procedure. We're going to go over to ChatGPT, and what I'm going to have it do, I had this idea because there are different flows that people use, is have it create one procedure if it's being programmatically automated by a member of your team, maybe yourself, and another procedure if you're doing it with a virtual assistant and how they would go through that process, specifically using Google Workspace. But remember, you could adapt this to any kind of calendar system you have. The main idea here is about the process, which means identifying what kind of events you have and then what kind of other information and metadata you want to collect along the way. All right, so something I did last episode, which I thought worked really well, was I cut the episode recording into two pieces, and I pulled out the transcript from the first part of the episode where I'm explaining the workflow. And what I did in Loom is I just downloaded the transcript right here. And the reason I wanted to do that was so I could upload it here as a guide for the procedure that I want ChatGPT to create for me, in addition to the flowchart itself. So here is what I'm prompting ChatGPT. For those of you who are listening on audio, I've uploaded a flowchart and transcript from the podcast episode I'm doing on this topic. Based on this flowchart and transcript, I need you to create two separate SOPs. For doing this workflow via full automation, our salespeople would authenticate their Google Workspace calendars to the automation server and would automatically log the activity based on the rules. Another workflow where a virtual assistant does the workflow with no automation. The assistant will just log each activity every Friday. They can do this by looking at the calendars within the same company workspace. So this will give us those two varying workflows. And one of the things I appreciate is ChatGPT does not expect me to be a great writer, because I understand that there's some poor phrasing choices in there. But it's going to get the general idea, and it's going to be able to pull a lot from the transcript and then hopefully a little bit from the flowchart. So let's see what it comes up with. I'm interested to see how it differs in these two workflows. So I often have to ask ChatGPT to refine some of its thinking, but this actually did a really good job. I think it's pretty tight. It really focuses on exactly what the flow is doing. So I don't really have any major corrections for the automated one. And then same with the virtual assistant version. The big thing here is just to make sure that the virtual assistant understands how they are supposed to find the prospects within the CRM. So there may be some CRM training you want to do with this virtual assistant before you just get them going on some kind of process like this. Whereas in the automated flow, you would presumably use the API to match the prospect, so it wouldn't be the same kind of issue. But this is something I think you'd be ready to give to a VA, give them with the flowchart, talk to your sales team about the naming, use some kind of system like Calendly to standardize that, and you'd be able to go very far with some kind of tracking and reporting like this. And I think this is a pretty good framework for how to think about a lot of different kinds of tracking and data management problems. Is if you can just get everybody aligned at the front end for how they're going to manage what things are named, what things are called, where things are stored, that's going to save you so much time in the data cleaning process. Otherwise, you're going to be going back trying to figure out what everything is. And there's a lot of, I don't know if fun is the right word, but there's a lot of learning that you can do trying to go back and clean up bad data. But if you just have some good standardized data up front, man, it makes it so easy, and you can move quick on these kind of reporting challenges. All right, so finishing up the doc here, we've got the questions, we've got the flow, and I've added the SOPs into the procedure sections. If you have processes you want me to review, even if they're new to me, I would love to do that. So just leave comments on YouTube, leave comments on Substack, and I will take a look at those. The main place to check out Building Process is buildingprocess.substack.com. And then we also have the YouTube channel, and that is Building Process on YouTube. So please check us out, share it with your friends. Appreciate your listening and feedback, which you can leave in the comments. And I hope you have a great week.